there was no church that was more generous than the Macedonian church. In 2 Corinthians 8, 1-5, Paul tells us how their joy overflowed in rich generosity. The encouraging thing for us about this joy was the circumstances it came from. Paul explains that they were in the midst of severe trials and extreme poverty, and it was in these times that God gave them his overflowing joy that resulted in generosity. Trials and suffering couldn't shake these believers because they didn't care about stuff. Their secret was not what belonged to them, but who they belonged to. And every one of us will also face trials and sufferings at some point in our lives. And just like the Macedonians, we must decide who or what we will trust in when they do arise. So let's look at 3 truths that the Macedonian believers teach us that will help us obtain the same joy and generosity they had in their extreme poverty. First, nothing can shake the joy of the generous. Paul's description of the Macedonian state of affairs should not be taken lightly. Severe tests of affliction and extreme poverty. These circumstances were more than minor setbacks, yet God gave them the joy to not only make it through, but to give generously in the process. Secondly, generosity flows from a heart of self-sacrifice, not self-preservation. The motivation of giving is not to give in order to get. Instead, just like the Macedonians, it begins with our surrender to God and flows from his joy as we trust in him. And finally, biblical giving comes from grace, not the law. Tithe, or 10%, is the biblical starting point for giving. Jesus validated this in Matthew 23, but as the Macedonians showed us, their giving was a direct result of the joy they found in God's grace, not from an obligation to give. These verses model for us the response God is looking for when we look at our financial situation. Paul tells us that the Macedonians gave themselves first to the Lord. In the same way, we should approach our finances by first affirming or reaffirming our commitment to trust God's promises. And secondly, we are told the Macedonians gave. Their generosity was the proof of where their joy really came from. And in the same way, our giving echoes what our hearts are trusting in.
Seinfeld is a show about. This sermon is a sermon about. No, that's not. That's not the connection. That's not the connection. That's not the connection here. We're wrapping up our series called First Things First. We're taking a look at how we relate to our resources, and so we want to wrap up today looking at the joy of generosity. But I want to do it in a Seinfeldian way. If you remember, if you're a fan of the show, there was one episode called The Betrayal in which the episode went backwards in time. And so it started with the end, which was a wedding, and it kind of wove its narrative through all the complicated, relationships and this and that, and kind of worked all the way back so that, you kind of saw the end result, and then you began to understand why that happened, and then you saw why that happened. And it actually goes all the way back. The episode ends with Kramer first meeting Jerry, coming in the door, 10 minutes prior to that, he comes in, and they're getting to become friends, and that's when Jerry says, hey, what's mine is yours, setting up the whole shtick for the whole show of how Kramer comes in and just kind of takes whatever he wants. Right? It explains kind of the whole thing. Well, that's kind of how today's sermon is going to work. We're going to start at the end and work back to the first thing. Right? Because we want to get first things first, but it's going to be best to kind of lay this out from the end to the beginning. So let's start off. We're looking at kind of a famous passage here in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul is talking to the Corinthians. And he says this, it's an often quoted verse, so I'm going to do the backwards sermon. He says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you'll abound in every good work. Very famous passage. You'll hear it over and over again. Why does Paul give this advice here? So the situation is, he is not really talking about tithing, about giving to the church. He is responding to a situation in the early church whereas he is spreading the gospel and churches are popping up all across Macedonia and moving towards Rome. Back home, the start of the church in Jerusalem, they are having a horrible time. They've got a drought. The Christians there are really under the gun. And so he begins to talk to the churches that he's connected with of going, we need to gather up an offering to help our brothers and sisters here. And so that's really the context of this. It's not about tithing. It is about coming and collecting this gift. And he wants to make them clear of going, this special project is really what we are all about, but don't mistake it. This is not about compulsion. It's not about having some type of campaign. It's not, a way that we're going to kind of trick you. It's not driven by that. It's not even driven particularly by duty. It's driven by this willingness. And ultimately, the truest measure of it is the cheerfulness of it. God loves a cheerful giver. Whatever generous gift that you are going to be providing, it is really to be measured on the level of cheer or joy. Not on, okay, did you give enough? Did you give as much as these folks or any type of duty? It is measured in terms of joy. Well, why does he do that? Why does he measure it by that? It's because in the chapter right before this, he talks to them about another church, the Macedonian church, which we just saw a video on. We're not going to get into all that. But he begins talking about this church that's in a way more poor situation. There are very meager resources. But he kind of brags about it. He goes, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches in the midst of their severe trial. Their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up into rich generosity. He didn't come and go, boy, we really laid it on thick for them. Boy, we really tricked them into giving up some money. He said, out of their joy comes their generosity. This is the very soil out of which this thing is happening. And he's going to go on to clarify. He goes, actually, we didn't even bring it up. They're the ones that took the initiative to say, we want to be a part of this. We get this. We get what God has done in our life. And we want to be part of building a gift for our brothers and sisters back in Jerusalem and helping them. And he goes, now, look, I'm not bringing up this example. Paul says this. I'm not bringing up this example to shame you. I'm bringing this example up to show you this is the true heart of it. This is what generosity is all about. It's not a measure of how much do I have, going out and going, oh, it's 10% or it's a little bit of this. It is out of the soil of joy that this really comes forth. And so he gives them the same advice. Whatever you're going to do, make sure you do it out of joy. Not out of duty, not out of compulsion, not out of checking some type of religious box. It must come out of joy, just like the Macedonians. So why does he make such a big deal about this joy thing and connecting it with our generosity? Well, if we would go back a little bit further, actually quite a bit further, we're going to kind of skip over Jesus for now. We're going to go all the way back into the Old Testament, and Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, begins talking about this in Isaiah 58. Now you have to understand, the time of the prophets are kind of a difficult time for the people of God, the Israelites, because bad things are starting to happen. And they're like, what gives, God? We thought we were the chosen people. We've been doing this. And Isaiah, speaking for God, he writes in Isaiah 58, there you go. He says, for day after day, they seek me. They seek out God. They seem eager to know my ways. These people are trying to get on track. Things have gone off track for them in their lives. They're kind of pursuing God. But then God says, but here's the problem. On the day of your fasting, you do as you please. You know, they picked out this example of going, look, we have fasted and we've prayed. We put on the sackcloth and the ashes. We're trying to make this right. We're pulling out the big book of all the religious stuff that we can figure out to kind of get you to tip back into our favor here. We're going down this checklist and we're doing this. And he goes, but when you do it, you do as you please. You miss the heart of it. You do it under compulsion. You do it under duty. You do it because, well, we've got to kind of twist God's arm into maybe treating us well again. Moving this into a place of going, it's just a religious exercise. God says, I admit it. You do the fasting. That's all right. But what you do has very little to do with me. All you've done is a religious exercise, and that doesn't move me at all. He says, here's the type of fasting that I want. He says, is it not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loosen the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke, every bondage. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood. See, I could approach fasting as going, this is going to help out my budget line. Especially when all 6 of us fast. It really helps out the budget line. There's nothing that even comes close to our food bill in our household. Man, I'm saving nickels and dimes on top of one another. We're not eating today because we need to please God, and it's going to help our wallet. We're going to just keep that stuff for us. And he's going, if you fast, why don't you take that food and go feed someone? Do you think it pleases me to do a religious exercise and forget about the people around you? If you think that's what drives me, you don't know me at all. You seem to know want to know my ways, but you don't get me at all. What really deeply matters to me. Is he not just describing here this kind of generosity of going, if no matter what I do in my life religiously, if I am unconnected, unmoved, and uninvolved in the things of people around me, God says it's nothing. This is exactly what Jesus said to the Pharisees, the top religious leaders of the day. He took them to the woodshed. He said, oh yeah, you tithe. Oh, you cut that really fine on every little possible thing. You make sure you get it just right so you can go, I've done it right before God. He goes, then you use those same things to excuse yourself from taking care of your parents. You don't know the first thing about me. I care about people. I care about the things around you. I have called you and provided for you to be generous. You are in this situation because you have forgotten what matters to me. As we follow down through the passage, he brings up, he goes, oh, sure, you honor the Sabbath to do it your own stuff. To do your own stuff. If you would get that the religious things that you do, the practices you would put in life, and would line them with what my heart is. And this is the whole point of that chapter. If you would get this right, if you would learn to be generous and watch out for those around you, if you would put my heart with your heart, can you help me out? Then you will find your joy in the Lord. You're trying hard to figure out what has gone wrong and why I have abandoned you and ignored you and not coming through for you. It's because you've forgotten who I am. And what matters most, and if you get that online, it's not just everything's going to be all right. He goes, yeah, if you would come, your light will shine. You will be restorers of the broken walls. And then you will know the joy that I made you for. This is about joy. This understanding of our connection to our resources. It's not about savings. It's not about the stuff that we have. It is about joy, folks. There is this line. Why does Isaiah make this big deal? Why is he making this connection between their resources and how they're trying to approach God and joy? Well, we have to go back to Deuteronomy 28. We're going back even further here. Deuteronomy 28 is of the law. Now, I need to give you a warning. I don't know if my batteries are dead or what here. Thank you. Is Deuteronomy 28 is high voltage. It's danger. Watch out. Don't read that on a bad day, because then you're going to get on a bridge and jump off. All right? It's a lot of hard stuff. See, God brought these instructions, these laws into people's lives, into Israelites' lives, to go, this is the right way to live. There is an agreement, a covenant. If I'm your God, you will be my people. If you listen to me, I will bring blessing in your life. I will make sure you have what you need. The end of this book is, but if you forget me, if you turn from my ways, he brings them to the woodshed. This is the proverbial mom going, if you don't clean your room when I get back in an hour, you are going to be really sorry. Chapter 28 is the really sorry. That's why Isaiah is going, you're in the trouble you're in because you forgot what I was all about. Now, we're not interested, I'm not looking at 28 to find out what the bad stuff is happening. We understand that happens. But look at the reasoning. Because you did not serve the Lord your God dutifully and religiously and just went through the grind of church. Oh, wait, that's not what it says, right? Sorry. Because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly in the time of prosperity. What did God just tie together? I'm providing your stuff. I'm the one that gives you prosperity. Everything that you have, I have provided for you. What do I ask back? Joyful. Gladness. Understanding my resources are not my source. God is my provider. I don't need to cling to. I don't need to chase after. I put God first. Because you did not joyfully and gladly serve your Lord. All these things are going to happen. Now, this isn't the only test here. There's a number of things that he goes through. But how about it? Would you have ever guessed that on God's list of going, make sure you get this done, that it would include the words joyfully and gladly? We would think it would be kind of, don't spit, don't gamble, don't kick cats. Well, actually, go ahead. Because you lack the joy and the gladness. Why does he say this? Let's go back to the first thing. Deuteronomy 14, earlier in the book. He's teaching about tithing. Tithing is God's way of kind of getting us oriented right with our resources. He goes, all right, here's what you need to do. Every year, you're going to bring a tithe, a tenth of everything that I have blessed you with. All your fields, all your grapes, all your cattle, all your everything. You're going to bring that. You're going to bring the tithe of your grain, new wine, olive oil, the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he chooses as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. Now, I love this verse because it starts with my favorite word. These are the jokes, folks. Come on, you got to keep up here. Eat. Wait a minute. I thought we were supposed to bring the tithe and dump it at God's lap and go, okay, well, I only get to live on 90. He's built into this. When you bring this, you get to eat it. You're going to eat this not at your home and just be kind of thankful in this kind of generic sort of way. You have to eat this where I say so. Right? This is something that you're going to consume so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God. Oh, okay, well, I'm not quite sure how the eating and revering fit together. He goes on to talk about, he goes, now, if you live way up north, in the hills of Pennsylvania, and you can't quite get all that stuff down here, you can go ahead and sell it, transfer it into money, and you can bring that down, and then you can buy the stuff that you need, stop at McDonald's, grab a couple Happy Meals, and then bring, but you still have to eat it at my place. And he goes, after giving that exception, go ahead. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. God never introduced this idea of tithe to go, well, God's trying to steal money out of my checkbook. I guess I gotta do it. All right, there it is. Right at the core of this thing, he goes, you're going to take the things that I've given you, you're going to set them aside so that we can be together. In the presence of God, I want us to celebrate how good I am to you and how good the world I've made it for you. And you are going to rejoice. The giving and the rejoicing are tied together. It was never a duty. It was never about just checking a box. I mean, do you see this? The Heavenly Father is going, I want you at my table. You don't get to stay where you are. You've got to come to me. I want this right here, right now. That's the only way that you can really put this whole puzzle together. Because if you don't put it together, that I'm your source, you will always be in danger no matter how much you have in your bank account. Because your stuff will never give you joy. Never. Come to me and find joy here. Paul talks about a cheerful giver thousands of years later, because at the very beginning God said this was meant for joy, not for duty, not to grumble and complain, not to, I gotta do this. And the implication is when you don't get this right, there's a clear measurement. You have no joy in your generosity. You got it in the wrong category. You still think somebody's taking something away from you. And God's going, I gave it to you to give it away. I want to provide for you. Remember, Paul says that? God's going to abundantly give you what you need. It's going to be all right. You don't need to be tight-fisted. I want you to experience and know the joy of this. And to build on it, go ahead. In the next couple of verses, he goes, then every 3 years when you bring it all, the tithes, you know what you're going to do? You're going to give it all away. It's going to go to the Levites, the priests. You know why? Because they don't have any land. They can't provide for themselves. They are the people that are completely dependent on God. If God doesn't deliver for them, they're out. No Big Macs. They don't have a nice little plot of land on the side. That's it. The foreigners, the fatherless, the widows who live in your towns, so they may come and eat and be satisfied because God is good. And then the Lord will see that and I'm going to bless you for it. I built you for generosity. It's not a duty. And if it's a duty for you, you've missed it and you've missed me. That's what this all kind of comes down to here, right? And you guys are just fantastic. You know, we've taken on this building project. That was above and beyond. You guys get putting God first in your life, and then we've done some incredible things with that. I want you to make sure you don't miss the mark, though, and miss the joy. That's why the fourth step, for those that you were here 2 years ago, we went through the 4 steps. If you're new, we had 4 steps. No one told anybody what to give. Everybody sought God on their own as God led that. But the 4th step was the most crucial. That I feel joy about what I've pledged, about what I give. And really, it's not just that building, it's about everything. The church, the building, your generosity with the people around you, the generosity with the people that are not good and kind to you. Generosity to simply friends is not the full extent of God's generosity. It's to live open-handed and say, my Lord has provided. I need not fear. I don't need to grasp. I can live open-handed. Don't miss the joy, folks. It's the ultimate measure. Not the amount, not the percentage, not the whatever else we would put in there. The ultimate test is the joy. That's what we built this for, right? That was always the first thing, not a later idea, right from the very start. Do this in my presence and rejoice. On the back of your connection card, you got some more questions here. Last of our questions, just for you in your prayer time, before God. You need to ask anybody else's. Go right to God and say, where am I at on some of those things? And if your heart isn't in that place of joy, Lord, how do I get there? How do I experience this and do this in a way that lines up with the way that you mean it and designed it for? Because this is meant to be a good thing, a good thing. Let's pray. Lord, we're sorry that sometimes we get things out of order. And we put things on top that really aren't supposed to be on top, and we just kind of grind this out. But Lord, you from the very start have always called us to this place of joy. And when we trust you and when we grab hold of all these truths and put them in our lives and get ourselves in right balance with our resources, there is reward doesn't seem quite like the right word. It's just, it fits into our life, and there's this place of great joy. Just like the Macedonians. Lord, help us to get there. We get distracted. We get teased or tricked into other plans. Lord, we want to line up